Hello, my friends. Jeremy with Go here for September 12th, 2019 spoilers. Frankly, I gotta be honest with you, we got a lot of draft chaff today in the spoilers. We'll start off with Fierce Witchstalker. It's a 4 converted mana cost for 4 Trampler. When Fierce Witchstalker enters the battlefield, you create a food token. So obviously, this has something to do with being able to draft this card. I mean, for a 4/4 with trample, sure, great. Yeah, that seems good. That's potentially a card that you would see at the end of the pack. Likely maybe even selected at the beginning of the pack if the food tokens tend to be a major trope through your limited cycle or through your draft environment. Not really a card that I see getting built into many high-quality constructed decks unless food is just the thing, right? And even then, 1 food token on entering the battlefield for a 4/4 Trampler for 4, maybe. Not ultimately in terms of value a bad common, but not a great common either. Definitely a draft card. Moving on. Wolf's Quarry, sorcery for 6 converted mana cost, 4 and 2 green. Create 3 1/1 green boar creature tokens with, when this creature dies, create a food token. So, 3 follow-up food tokens, which equates to 9 life at the cost of 6 mana. We also get 1/1 creatures. This probably plays really nicely into that beast that can't attack unless you have a 1/1 creature. Might be something that's worthwhile for the 5/5 trample on a converted mana cost of 3, but there's just such a separation in the converted mana cost of Wolf's Quarry and that 3-drop that I don't know that we're going to see real value out of this. Again, probably a draft chaff card, more of a limited environment. 3 1/1 creatures isn't a bad thing, especially if we're coming up with some way to buff them. Oathsworn Knight, one of the rares that was spoiled today, and one of only 2 rares that we'll be covering today for September 12th. But 1 colorless, 2 black, enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. It is a human knight. Whenever it attacks, it attacks each turn if able. If damage would be dealt to Oathsworn Knight while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, you prevent that damage and remove a +1/+1 counter. So we essentially have a 4-turn stifle on any creature that doesn't have trample, right? A creature that doesn't have trample is not going to send damage over the top of the Oathsworn Knight, and there's nothing saying that we can't actually continue to put +1/+1 counters on this knight in some capacity. Not really sold on this card. I think it has some good value, especially when you couple maybe Ujin's Conjurant with that. Ujin's Conjurant, again, has the same ability for us to be able to stagnate combat damage. Thunderous Snapper, whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost 5 or greater, draw a card. It is Simic times 4 for a 4/4. So, great. Yeah, it's an uncommon. I could see this maybe being valuable, not really in constructed. Again, kind of one of those cards that you want to be able to play on curve into a 5-drop or a 6-drop, draw some cards, and continue with the 40-card limited game plan. Knight of the Keep, 3 converted mana cost, 2 colorless and a white for a vanilla 3/2. It is a human knight, a vanilla 3/2, one of those creatures that maybe you draft when you're missing some 3-drops in your draft deck or your sealed deck or something. Next card is Lost Legion, 1 colorless and 2 black for a 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 2, another common. Scry 2 is very, very good. 3-drop in black for the double black. Not too big on the double black. I would like to have seen this, and it would have really increased the value of the card at 2 colorless and a black for the 2/3 with the Scry 2 trigger, but still for the dedication to black, might be playable and limited in some capacity. It is a Spirit Knight. I don't know if it gets built into any of the Spirit decks that remain as remnants after the rotation, but Lost Legion nonetheless, another Knight. We have had the pleasure of seeing many, many Knights spoiled over the course of this set. It tends to be what they are focusing on. Next card is Ogre Errant, 3 colorless and a red for a 3/4. Whenever it attacks, another target attacking knight gains menace until end of turn. So again, when you're in that draft environment and everybody's going to be going for knights, maybe pulling one of these as a decent 4-drop. 3/4, not bad on the toughness department there, and being able to sink some additional damage through menace could be highly beneficial for us. Everybody's going to be drafting knights, and one of the good things about that is there's plenty of them to go around as you're cracking draft packs here. Next card, another red card, Raging Redcap, 3 converted mana cost, 2 colorless and a red for a 1/2 double striking Goblin Knight. We got Goblin Knights now. Again, knights everywhere. So if that is the trope that continues, we certainly will see a lot of benefit from that. Glass Casket at uncommon, 1 colorless and a white. When Glass Casket enters the battlefield, exile target creature an opponent controls with converted mana cost 3 or less until Glass Casket leaves the battlefield. So I really like this. This is a really solid replacement for Baffling End. Only the creature re-enters the battlefield when the Glass Casket disappears, effectively making targets for artifact and enchantment removal that much more of a thing that you would want to play main board. But still, a decent card in terms of limited or draft environments. I don't know how effective it'll be in constructed. Then again, I don't know how effective artifact removal will be post-rotation. Deafening Silence at uncommon, 1 white for an enchantment that states each player can't cast more than 1 non-creature spell each turn. Clearly, this is an additional buffer, a way to stagnate our opponents and provide ourselves with quite a bit of ammo in terms of a creature strategy. We want to be able to move away from any of those shenanigans where our opponents are cantripping or drawing cards or casting cards at the end of our turn, or multiple cards at the end of our turn, even burn spells to try to stack damage against us or against a planeswalker or creature that we control. Deafening Silence might be able to see some play. I don't really know how deep this card's going to go until I get an opportunity to test it in a couple of environments, but I can tell you this, that Deafening Silence may not be a standard card. Rather, Deafening Silence may be one of those 1-drop white cards that seeds its way into Legacy, Modern. Certainly implications there that a card like this may be used to completely choke out some of those really rapidly accelerating decks that fire off multiple cantrips, generate lots of free mana, and continue doing so. Deafening Silence could be what White Eldrazi needs to be the next big thing. Wandermare, another horse getting printed in Throne of Eldraine. I'm not disappointed about this at all. For 1 colorless, a green, and a white for a 3/3. Whenever you cast a creature spell that has an adventure, put a +1/+1 counter on Wandermare. So if night tokens aren't your thing and night creatures aren't your thing as you're in your draft environment, maybe adventures can be your thing. From what I've seen, most of the creatures that contain an adventure are night creatures anyway, but still, 3 for a 3/3 that grows when you cast creature spells with an adventure, hopefully getting value off the adventure before you cast the creature. Really, really good stuff. Edgewall Innkeeper, 1 green for a 1/1. It says whenever you cast a creature spell that has adventure, draw a card. So now we're getting into this adventure trope, which makes me think maybe we didn't see all of the adventure cards we're supposed to see just yet, given that only, by my calculations, around 137 or so of the 269 cards are effectively spoiled by this point on September 12th, and maybe this Edgewall Innkeeper becomes the 1-drop that we need to do a Throne of Eldraine specific or centric deck leveraging adventure. Speaking of adventure, for 1 colorless and 2 white, we've got a 2/3 flyer in Ardenvale Tactician that has an adventure spell called Dizzying Swoop for a colorless and a white. At instant speed, we can tap up to 2 creatures. So effectively for 5 mana, we can tap up to 2 creatures, cast a 2/3 flyer, and swing in with whatever other aggro we have on the ground. We've yet to really seen a way to expedite the adventure portions of these creature spells, but there's got to be something that we're missing so far. There's almost always a missing piece of the puzzle. Either way, a 2/3 flyer for 3, not bad. Pretty good in terms of a common, and having that additional adventure makes it highly collectible, as I really don't see this adventure trope returning much outside of Throne of Eldraine unless we revisit that plane. An uncommon 1 black sorcery. Target opponent reveals his or her hand. You may choose a non-land card from your opponent's hand. If you do, your opponent exiles that card. If a non-black card was exiled this way, exile a card from your hand. That card is gross. We effectively have an uncommon Thoughtseize, if you will. In Standard, I don't know that Thoughtseize or Inquisition of Kozilek gets displaced in older formats, but certainly Sound Intrusion is going to be one of those ones that'll ruin a lot of games right from the get-go. And we talk about going Sound Intrusion into Thought Erasure on turn 2 can make for some very disruptive, kind of frustrating hand disruption. And hand disruption is maybe one of those aspects of Magic the Gathering that can effectively ruin the game for new players. I know, it's a bold statement. I know, it's just part of the Magic the Gathering thing, but hand disruption becomes very highly frustrating. If you can look at me and tell me honestly that you're not a little frustrated with seeing Thought Erasure in every game that you play on Arena on turn 2, I'll tell you, I don't believe you. We've got a 1 red instant called Red Cap Brawl. Deals 4 damage to target creature or planeswalker, and if this deals damage to a non-red permanent, we have to sacrifice a land. I think sacrificing a land later game on these draws feels pretty good. This might actually be a very effective card. I can see that removing creatures or planeswalkers from play could be exceptional just for the sacrifice of a land, especially if we have the ability to play land cards from the top of our deck with Experimental Frenzy, any number of other things that make Red Cap Brawl a really interesting uncommon and probably something we're going to see in Constructed in some capacity. We have got a 3 colorless, 1 green drop uncommon called Okame Adversary. It is an elf warrior. It costs 2 less to cast, and if an opponent controls a green permanent, it's got Death Touch. Whenever Okame Adversary deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. If there is any type of creature in Magic that your opponents are reluctant to block, it's the ones with Death Touch, because oftentimes it's pretty frustrating. And if you're talking about pumping this creature, using it for other leverage, it becomes essentially a Shadow Mage Infiltrator in green, right? The ability to attack in, draw a card when it deals combat damage, exceptional. If we can give it Might of the Masses, give it Trample somehow give it Allure and start dealing Death Touch with it, because they don't want us to be drawing cards as well. It's an interesting card. I don't see elves really surviving in terms of elf ball after rotation. We're just losing too many pieces, namely Steel Leaf Champion, Marwyn, etc. But there are possibilities, right? In a draft or limited environment, and again, I keep going back to that, lots of chaff this evening, this card is exceptional. It is absolutely exceptional. And I'm very proud to say that if I draw it in a draft environment or open it in a draft environment, I may pick it on a pack 2 or a pack 1, pick 3, pick 4, if it still comes back to me. Fell the Pheasant instant speed for 1 colorless and a green. Green instant, Fell the Pheasant deals 5 damage to target creature with flying and would create a food token. Not bad value. Definitely a limited card that you'll want to see or at least have access to. In the event that flyers seems to be something that's really problematic in a draft environment of Throne of Eldraine, so far the flyers don't really seem to be that big a deal. Most of it is hasty creatures on the ground that are thumping your skull. Next card, Rakdos ×4 for a 2/3 Elite Headhunter Human Knight. It's got Menace. For 3 Rakdos, you can sacrifice another creature or an artifact. Elite Headhunter deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker, clearly finding some use for our food and adding additional damage. Unfortunately, we are not able to deal 2 damage for 3 converted Rakdos to a player. I would like to be able to shock for that. That would have made that card exceptional, and I don't think it would have even bumped it up into the rare category had they given us the ability to do so. But creatures and players will die when we're sacrificing other creatures and artifacts to deal 2 damage to them. And then finally, to close out the night, we get a generous reprint from WotC of Sorceress Spyglass. Originally printed in Ixalan, this 2-drop artifact gives you the ability to completely lock out a planeswalker that they may be playing around, a creature that may have an activated ability, and it also gives you knowledge on turn 2 of what our opponent's game plan is. It's a very valuable sideboard card. It's one that I see still floating around, especially if the meta leans towards control or any particular set of planeswalkers in general. And that's going to do it for us for September 12th, 2019. I am Jeremy with Landsago. Be sure to click that follow button here on YouTube. It is a great way to show us that you love us and not even have to meet us. We can't do this without you, folks. See you soon.